welcome back to the mind of the amateur, the amateur's mind. Today I'm going to try to do something unique in that I wanted to dedicate this video to a particular position and the mindset that we can observe behind it, depending on what sort of player plays the position. And so I would like to analyze a particular setup a little bit more in depth rather than going through a whole entire game. Although I guess it is somewhat typical with this series that even when we do go through a game, we pick certain very important decisions and moments, and we tend to analyze that more in depth. So coincidentally, this game was played by one of my students as black here, and we are entering a mainline English in one of the weirdest possible move orders ever. So normal would be here e5, and after bishop g2 both c6 and d5 would lead to normal mainline English. Now here we are playing e5 instead of the super logical d4, which is just a no-brainer here to be played. And to some extent this is yes, a bit of a disappointment for me as a coach, because this is a thing that we have been discussing with students left and right and center, that conquer the center, and then knight c6 e5, and black is already better. So yep, that's a bit of a pity there, but anyway, e5 took us back to a, as I said, mainline English. Now after knight c3, the best and most principled move is knight b6, which is a bit counterintuitive because we retreat the knight and that's the third time we move it. But unfortunately it's quite difficult to keep the knight on d5, because after castles, pawn d4 break is actually pending, and so it's important to drop the knight back early to b6 so that then we can create a firm grip on this d4 break, and white can't have a chance to achieve that. In the game we played c6, which again strikes me as a very odd and counterintuitive move that really shouldn't have come up as a candidate because it's ugly. It blocks in the knight and it doesn't really contribute to the position much, because although we needed to defend the knight on d5, but white doesn't really want to take this, and after the very simplistic knight f3 we already are struggling to find sensible moves to defend e5. If bishop d6 again, this d4 break is inevitably going to be quite annoying. All white pieces are coordinated beautifully. The black queen side is very much lacking in development and potential good squares in the future. But as luck would have it, and I'm quite surprised because this was played by 2300 as white, they took it. Now this allows black to create a beautiful central pawn formation to get rid of with the silly pawn on c6 and improve it or promote it to a beautiful central pawn, and it allows the knight to come to c6. So that was a bit of a lemon by white, but we'll skip over that and we'll arrive at the crucial position right here with queen b3. Now this is a really fascinating position to offer to various levels of chess players, because their response to what's going on here would be so incredibly wide from really bad for black to pretty awesome. In fact, I prefer black. It's not even funny. I would say that until about 16, 17, even 1800s, but I really don't want to create here categories that then will come back and hunt me. I would say that most amateurs here would go and think along the lines of this. Okay, my d5 pawn is hanging. I can't defend it because b7 is hanging. I can't push it because bishop b7 is hanging, and so I have to play e4. That would be roughly the train of thoughts, which would contain at least 3 erroneous assessments, which, considering that we have looked at 4 moves, is quite impressive. Oh, actually no, sorry, it's only 2 bad decisions. Yeah, let's go one by one. Now once we step up a level and we reach about 2000 and beyond, players would begin to suspect how valid this move can be, especially if they listen to some awesome chess videos published by good chess YouTubers. That was wink wink. Because let's face it, this is queen out early, and the proposition is to use this to grab a pawn. Now neither should we do in an opening. And so, if we have got the correct mindset sitting behind the black army, we should be thinking, or at least begin to think along the lines of, righto, I'm gonna sack the pawn and get a lot of big fat tempos on that white queen and see how we go. But which pawn to give up? And so I guess the weaker, or not even the weaker, but most people here would be more willing to give up b7 than d5, simply because this is central, this is rubbish. So they go, okay, I go bishop e6, queen b7, knight d7. And again, now there are two big camps where we can divide players. Then there would be one who would go like, okay, then bishop takes d5 and this is rubbish. And then there would be one that would go again, then that, hang on, this can't be rubbish. Ever since queen b3 has been played, white has been playing with the two pieces out that he has, the queen and the bishop, whilst I constantly am developing my pieces. This can't be right. And so they continue calculating, and after bishop e6, queen b7, knight d7, bishop d5, they look at knight c5, big fat tempo, or rook b8. And they realize that actually the queen has only c6, which I then can attack again with the rook, thereby occupying a beautiful open file. The queen is still extremely limited in where it can go, because queen b5 loses to rook c5. I probably lost some of you here already with the calculation, but the point is the mindset. Because if you believe that this is rubbish, for white that is, then you are going to be more willing to enter this line, even if you can't calculate it far. Now let's have a look. So bishop e6, queen takes b7, knight d7, bishop takes d5, rook b8. And the drama and the trouble begins. Sorry, knight c5 wasn't playable here because of bishop, sorry, the rook was hanging. So, queen a6 not playable because it hangs, queen c6 has to be played, rook c8, queen b7, almost forced, because queen b5, as per indicated before, loses to rook c5. So queen b7 forced. For the record, now we are up to 1, 2, 3, 4 queen moves on move 11. If this is not bad, then nothing is in chess. You can't play like this. We are now destroying and demolishing and I don't even know what word to use, the Morpheus principles upon which the whole entire modern chess was built, which is that initiative and development before anything else. If you want to really dampen it down, Alekhine was the embodiment later on, and he defeated none other than the machine Capablanca, somewhat improving but mostly building on similar principles. And so here, the amazing rook c7, queen b3, bishop takes, and queen c8 is putting white on the verge of defeat instantly. Because ironically, or actually it's not ironic at all, it's very logical, we are about to trap this bishop on its starting square. Holy moly. How good is that? In fact, queen c8 here might be even more accurate. I'm not sure which one is better. I would be curious to interview the Mighty Engine here. So Mighty Engine is agreeing with me. Queen c8, king f1, bishop d5, queen d5, and bishop c5 followed by castles, and the computer just says, yeah, don't do this, guys. Don't try it at home or anywhere else. It's rubbish. And I'm more than happy to accept that. Zero development, king stuck in the middle, not gonna be good. And then we make this call that we do play bishop e6, and we have a very fine game. In fact, the only move, or the only logical move here for white, is to somehow try to get back in the game by fighting for the center, and d4 is a very logical attempt. If takes, then knight f3, and then the double isolated pawn is really, really bad for black. e4 is more logical, and then now apparently this is more capturable than it was before. But even here, if I was white, I would more likely play something like knight h3 and try to come in towards the center. So if you in this position bet for bishop e6 or bet on bishop e6, you would do the right thing. Now let's rewind the whole story and let's see how most people would think about knight c6, which is also a very appealing move because we want to go to d4 with a big fat tempi hitting the queen and the fork on c2. So then after knight c6, bishop e d5, a lot of players, I would say 1800 and below, but again I would hate to create these categories that then turn out to be wrong, but I would like to give you a ballpark just so we see how gradually, as we become better players, we think in deeper layers. So that level would go knight c6, bishop d5, and I'm dead because f7 is hanging, and yeah, I lost the pawn already. Which is again an extremely sloppy and somewhat ignorant way to calculate, because when we played knight c6, our number one intention was to play knight d4. So the least we would do is that after bishop d5 we look at knight d4. That's why we went there. And turns out, of course, that bishop takes f7 is an instant loss, because after king e7 the queen cannot keep the bishop and the c2 square protected at the same time, and after queen d5, queen takes, we are winning stuff and the game instantly. A beautiful line here is queen c4, b5, queen d5, which seems to work because now the rook is hanging on b8. But not the case. We can simply check down the rook, and when they take this, we take this, and see you later, alligator. Black is just winning. So again, that is a very interesting thing about calculation, and how calculation often actually does not take place in the amateur's mind, that they judge positions based on fears and threats and just things like, ah, that's hanging, I lost a pawn already, this can't be right. Which is in no way a correct way to assess a position. And you can't really stop a line where there are such powerful moves available as knight d4. Now, a lot better, of course, against knight c6 is queen takes d5, which is basically a proposition of queen trade, which we absolutely do not want to do. Luckily, we don't have to. Once again, there is a developing move at our disposal. And again, a seasoned player here would already rub their hands together and be happy, because they would know that we played the developing move. We're about to play at least one more, whether it be knight b4 or bishop e6, it doesn't matter, with a tempo. And that is plenty enough for a pawn and an insecure king. Now, an interesting line would be knight b4, queen e4 back, f5, and after, I guess queen b1 is a must, because otherwise knight c2 comes, queen c7, and knight c2 can't be stopped. That's that. Short and sharp and simple. If the queen goes back to b3, again, knight d4, queen d1, queen c7, and again, we observe an amazing journey of this queen, and amazing should be replaced absolutely shockingly atrocious. 1, 2, 3, 4, once again in 10 moves. That can't be right, and we know that this can't be right. And this is what I very often, I wouldn't say I don't understand, but I like to posit to players of the level who would be afraid of losing this pawn like so, that when I demonstrate this line to them, or even when they make them calculate this line with knight b4, queen b1 here, then I'm like, surely you would be crazy scared here as white to lose to some knight b4, bishop e6, to which they invariably respond with, oh yeah, absolutely, there is no way I would enter this. And yet, as a black, they would no way allow them to take this. Which then, when I propose this question here, that how do you feel about this is white, they instantly go like, oh no, white is dead. So there is an incredible contrast and conflict when I put the players, the amateur's mind, on the opposite side of the board. So it turns out, and this is one of my hobby horses, my very common theories, is that on a lower level of chess, fear is one of the most important factor in decision making, and it should never be. Ideally, there is no such walks of life where fear is the number one component of decision making. We could take it back to the flight or fight concept, which partly is fear, but it seems to me that almost always the fight element is more than drastically removed from the components of how we make decisions, and fear is like 99% dominating what calls we make. So it turns out that in this position, both knight c6 and bishop e6 offer a beautiful position for black, which actually is crystal clear logic based on chess principles that we live by, which is center and development. And here comes the very, very sad twist of fate, that despite of all this, black ended up playing here e4. And the silence is more for myself than for anybody else. Really a shocker of a move, because not only does it not develop or do anything for the center, in fact it ruins it, more on that in a second, but it totally misses the chance to play and think dynamically. And I can guarantee you, and this is, as a coach, the biggest heartbreaker for me, that somewhere black has miscalculated, because he has calculated these lines and he absolutely misjudged one of those positions. How do I know that? Because they spent 5 minutes on e4. You don't spend in a 15-15 5 minutes on this position if you don't attempt to make these work, which fills me with pride, because I'm happy that they at least tried, but at the same time it fills me with sadness, because they somehow managed to talk themselves, another extremely common phenomenon in the amateur level of chess, that they know what the right thing is, but they can't calculate it. They panic, refer back to fear, and they don't do it. They know it's the right thing. Their instinct, their experience, their learning, everything tells them this is the right thing. They can't calculate it all the way to the end, which is a skill question, and you can't say anything to that. It's fine. If everyone could calculate like Houdini, everyone would be Houdini. But there is 3 things, or 3.5 there, that tells you do it, 1 that tells you don't do it, 1 is backed up by fear, instant call on that. And the worst part of it is that even if you don't see how it works, all the positions I presented are very visibly playable. This is very visibly a disaster, because now after knight h3, all of a sudden white has got 3 pieces out versus nada, zilch. Knight f4 is incoming. The black center may look good, but the reality is it's just a disaster, because d3 is gonna shred it apart, and the whole position just doesn't make sense. If I showed it to anyone above a certain level of chess, which would be a very low level in fact, they would go like, no way I want to play this as black. And yet we ended up in this trap. So I suppose there was a lot of powerful messages in there, or I hope at least, and I don't want to repeat it, but it's a very interesting thing to note, that when we play chess along sound principles, then we should never ever end up with a decision like this, even if we don't see those lines that I played out for you, because we know from experience and the likes that I listed there, that one of these pawn sacks at least should take us to a very, very good position. Now, somewhat sadly, the game still fizzled into some crazy stuff. Another typical reaction, by the way, from a big bunch of players, that when things start going bad, immediately jump on a queen trade, like as if it was a must. Which really is the worst thing you can do when your position is bad, because when your position is really, really bad, like this one, bad meaning we're not losing on material, but it's crystal clear that it is just a disaster, then your only hope to stir the pot is to stir the pot. You can't stir the pot when there is no stuff on the board. And stuff is queens. After just a simple knight f4, takes, this position has fallen apart. I can't defend a pawn on d5. Holy moly. That's it. Now, both sides played really, really bad moves here for a fair while. Like, this is incredibly greedy in a bad way, because he could win with this pawn without trading the queens. And now, again, the developing moves come one after the other, All of a sudden, black is back in the game. Look at that. All three pieces out, all three of them with temples. Haha, happy days. And after a few... Okay, this is weird. And this is again a typical case of being incredibly materialistic, because what else could be the purpose of this move than to apply to pressure to b2? Which is just a fundamentally flawed idea, because now, having achieved some sort of pressure on the king side, we should direct our attention as best as we can to this side, complete development, and try to make the most of what's happening here. And of course e4 is not hanging because h3 is hanging, one thing that would already be an obstacle to some who doesn't think along the lines of dynamic chess. But still, after bishop rook e8, it is a very, very playable position. And again, typical case here, bishop e5 wants to win this. That's not really the way how you utilize a queen like that. The idea of, or rather the way to utilize a queen like that is that if this queen says to the bishop, I don't really want you to develop because then I take this. And potentially that too. Now, as white, I would not hesitate to give it up at the right moment and then go behind and come in. But that's a different story altogether. But this actually makes capturing b2 almost impossible, because anytime you take, you get pinned and you lose the bishop. Which then makes us go like, so what exactly was the purpose of this move? And again, apply principles. You look at your guys. Good old Sairavan, Mr. Sairavan told us that all guys need to attend the party. You bring them to the party, and here we go. We have a totally playable position. And after bishop e5, again, queen d2, my... Oh, jeez. Okay. A further few very, very dubious moves. And the whole thing fell apart here when black decided that it was okay to give up bishops 4 knights in a totally open position, where in fact he could have played bishop c4 without any consequences whatsoever, and white is still in the struggle town to bring these into the game. So overall, whilst I really didn't want to sound like I wanted to give a lot of grief to my own student, although I'm pretty sure it did come across like that to many, I think I managed to highlight hopefully a lot of points about how people tend to think versus how they should be looking at thinking in similar scenarios. And on that note, I'm going to call this video off, and I will be back with more soon. Thank you. Bye.